we can go ahead and get started. My name is Jane McKinley. I'm with Richmond Cohousing, and we, with 4 other co-housing communities who are in the process of forming at some phase, are sponsoring this event. We're all very excited about the fact that we have such a good turnout and such a beautiful day to have the turnout. So I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what the itinerary is for the afternoon, and also introduce to you a couple of special guests that we have with us who will kind of kick off the event. We'll start off with Alice Alexander. She is from Durham, and Alice is the executive director of the, let me get it straight here, the Cohousing Association of the United States. So we have national representation.
Don't be too impressed because I'm the only staff person. If you can't remember anything after you leave here today, just remember cohousing.org. It is a great resource. We serve as a connector and clearinghouse for all things co-housing. I did want to mention in May in Salt Lake City, we're having an Aging in Community Conference. And on April 30th, we're having a National Co-Housing Open House Day. So there's a lot happening. I thank you all for being here. It sometimes takes a lot of courage about, do I want to do co-housing? I can tell you that you will not regret anything. It's a marvelous, marvelous way to live. So if I can be helpful at all, I'm going to be around for questions.
And Alice can tell you firsthand about forming a community because she was the co-founder of the Durham co-housing community, and which just basically opened up in 2014, didn't it?
We did, after 5 years, and it was worth every year. Durham Central Park Co-housing Community, we are urban.
And we also have Lisa Poley, who is also a founding member of her community. From 2005 is when they began moving in. And Lisa has a long list of credentials that I have all listed here. But I know Lisa primarily because she is consulting with Richmond Cohousing along with Jubilee in our efforts to form our communities. Lisa has her doctorate degree from Virginia Tech, and she got her degree in cohousing. And she's the co-founder of Shadow Lake Village in Blacksburg. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lisa, but I did want to let you know, after Lisa has spoken, she's going to give you a general overview of the concept of co-housing. Then each of the communities is going to talk to you a little bit about what makes them unique. And then after that, we'll have Q&A. So if you wouldn't mind holding your questions until the end, and then we'll open it up for just coming around, talking to the individual communities, and of course refreshments. So again, welcome. So glad to see you here, and Lisa, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, welcome. It's great to see everybody here. Wonderful turnout. I'm extremely excited that we've been able to pull this event together because we're bringing together 5 different co-housing groups that are getting started and hoping to build in Virginia. And I'm sure this may have happened in other parts of the country, but I think it's very exciting that we're bringing groups together who are not only building community within their own projects, but also building community and mutual support across projects. Which I think is really valuable. And so my job today is to kind of take you guys on a brief tour of the what's and wherefores of co-housing. Again, I've lived in co-housing. Actually, I moved in 2002 to Shadow Lake Village in Blacksburg. So I am a long-time co-houser. And we moved in when my son was 18 months old, and he is about to turn 15. So he has grown up in co-housing. And I wish I had him here with me today so he could explain to you what that has meant to him to grow up in that environment. He has forbidden us from leaving, so that gives you an idea of it. So what I'm going to do, basically, I know some of you know a lot about co-housing already, and some of you probably know very little. And So we're going to kind of start at the beginning and talk a little bit about what it is, what makes it unique, where does it come from, and then go into kind of how does it work? How does it work living in cohousing, and what is it like to live in cohousing? And that is something that for the groups that are forming here, they are having ideas and dreams and hopes, and I hopefully can share some of the realities of what it's like to live in cohousing. So we'll go ahead and jump in and see how we do. Okay, so from my perspective, I got interested in cohousing about 25 years ago. I read the book on cohousing when I was 19, and I said, this is something that I definitely want to do. And a big part of that for me was recognizing that, you know, we have some challenges that we have to face in this century. Climate change and population and natural resource, you know, over extraction and loss of sense of community and all of that stuff. And so for me at least, one of the main reasons that I was drawn to cohousing is I really felt that this is a model. It's not a radical model, but it is a model for housing ourselves that I think really works for the future. And it does so in a way that doesn't ask us to do radical sacrifices and become, you know, monk-like in our lifestyle. But it does sort of very, in ways that are both subtle and profound, really bring us to living in a way that is, you know, sort of meets our core needs and then some, but doesn't take up quite as much in the way of resources. And so I feel like cohousing at its foundation is obviously a place that fosters meaningful connection between neighbors. And that's something that goes back to earliest humans, right? I mean, people have lived in communities and tribes since the beginning of humanity, as far as we know. And so this is a very natural way for human beings to exist. It's been a little bit more challenging in the current era. So meaningful connection now isn't something that we can guarantee we're going to have in our lives. We can maybe have meaningful connection with people on the TV. A lot of us live more through the lives of people in the shows that we watch than through the people around us. So it's finding our way back to actual flesh, face-to-face human connections with one another. And then it's also a way, without too much pain and suffering and sacrifice, to quite easily create a smaller footprint ecologically. And it creates unbelievable, again, pretty effortless opportunities to reduce consumption, reuse, recycle, share, live more sustainably, you know, in ways that you kind of don't even notice as being a negative or a drawback in any way. So generally, I feel like cohousing gives us a way to have a richer life with less stuff. Okay, so what is cohousing in a nutshell? Basically, one thing that it's not is it's not a commune. This is something I get all the time. Oh, in Blacksburg, oh, you live in the commune. So I've been explaining this for many, many years, that in fact it's not a commune. Not that there's anything wrong with communes, but it's a different model of housing. Basically, co-housing is a neighborhood. And it, I don't know if somebody knows how to, it keeps trying to get me on the internet, which I don't want to do. So every time it does that, it kicks me off. I'm being hacked. Yeah, so basically co-housing is a neighborhood that's designed to support a very strong sense of community and support among the neighbors there. And it's a neighborhood type that recognizes that people have a need both for privacy and autonomy and a need for community and connection. And so everything to do with co-housing design is about trying to balance those things and doesn't sort of assume that people are necessarily predisposed to wanting to spend every minute in every way interacting with people around them all the time. That many of us need a certain varying levels of privacy in our lives, as well as real meaningful connection with others. And so again, it goes back to the idea of the modern village. This is not a new model. It's a new take on an old model of housing ourselves. The history of co-housing is, this has been happening in Denmark since the late 1960s, early 1970s. There was an architect in Denmark who was looking at the sort of social issues of the day and saying, wow, you know, our housing really doesn't fit very well with the changes in our lifestyles. We have a lot of single parents. We have a lot of families. It used to be extended families would live in close proximity and kind of help one another out when times got rough. And then increasingly people were living in, you know, at far distances from one another and had very busy work lives. And he really felt that our housing wasn't meeting our modern needs. So he came up with this concept that would really allow people to reconnect and support one another, and that would be facilitated by the design of the community, both the architecture and site characteristics, as well as in the social characteristics that the community would embrace. So this is actually a fairly common housing type in Denmark now, cohousing. And you know, I've heard it said that it's been aspects of cohousing have been incorporated into a lot of the sort of standard housing that you would find in Denmark, even if they don't call themselves cohousing, because they recognize the value of this for quality of life. The idea came to the United States. It was brought by a couple of U.S. architects who went to study cohousing in Denmark in the mid to late 1980s, and they were sort of doing this for their master's thesis. They studied it, and then they came back to the U.S. They were so impressed with it that they wrote a book. We call the original Cohousing Bible. This is the one that I read when I was 19. Cohousing, a contemporary approach to housing ourselves. And so they brought the idea back, and of course the United States isn't Denmark, and so there has to be some adaptation for the U.S. context. But this sort of was the impetus to cohousing getting started in the U.S. And so basically, over the course of the last, say, 20 years or so, or 25 years, cohousing has slowly been growing. It sort of it took hold very quickly in the West Coast, and so there's a ton. I think are there 45 cohousing communities in California now?
I don't know by California, but there's a total of over 150 now.
Yeah, and then there's like another 200 that are in various stages of forming, and
there's 100 that are formally forming, yes, and there's
okay.
probably another 100 we don't even know about
that haven't registered on the website. So yeah, and so you know, it's sort of concentrated on the East and the West Coast. It really flourished early on in the West, and has sort of been catching up slowly on the East Coast and sort of in the Great Lakes area. It's a little bit slower to take hold in the middle part of the country, but it is starting to happen there as well. So why isn't it average everywhere? Everybody's living in cohousing like it is in Denmark. Our economic system and our banks and the way housing development works in the United States is very, very different than it works in Denmark. And it's much more difficult to get it built in the US. We don't fit into the little boxes that banks and developers usually like to fit them into when they're funding projects and doing real estate development, etc. So it's a little bit more of a pioneering effort here in the US. But cohousing is different. There isn't sort of one flavor. All cohousing has certain characteristics in common, but there's a tremendous amount of diversity outside of those sort of central characteristics. So this is Eastern Village in Silver Spring, Maryland, in the DC area. Oh, here we go again. Sorry,
Just
guys.
turn off the Wi-Fi, I guess.
Do what?
The Wi-Fi signal, just turn it off.
Can you do it? Oh, thank you, Dave. Yeah, so you have urban cohousing, very dense. Eastern Village is like 56 units on, I think, an acre and a half. It was a retrofit building. And then you have other communities that are suburban. I live at Shadow Lake Village. I think would be considered a suburban. This is my community. And so it sort of looks like a suburban neighborhood, but smushed together a little bit more, no cars in the center. And then rural. So you have communities who have a lot of land. A lot of times they'll be combined with agricultural projects or community-supported agriculture projects or a variety of other sort of activities. Sometimes they're combined with an eco-village model. And so the co-housing as the sort of housing, the village portion, and then the eco-village as sort of the broader context. So anyway, there's not a single formula or a single housing type. It has its own flavor. It's as different as the people who choose to do co-housing. The one thing, though, that is true across all co-housing communities, and that really differs from most housing that you'd be able to buy in the market, is that co-housing is initiated by people who want to make their own neighborhood. They're making the community that they want to live in. And that's not to say that everybody who eventually lives there is going to be part of the making process, but it's not a product that you buy off the shelf. It's something that people are making for themselves and are creating to meet their needs, their real housing needs and community needs. And so I think that what we can say is this is a part of the market that the broader housing sort of production market is missing. And that there's a lot of us who want something more from our housing in our neighborhoods than they're currently able to give us. And that's part of why we're interested in...
Here, here.
So there are sort of 6 principles that these 2 architects that did the study in Denmark, they decided a lot of people were starting to call various things co-housing. So they came up with these 6 principles that they felt really were at the core of what makes co-housing co-housing. Because there's a tremendous amount of confusion about what it is and what it isn't. So one of the core principles is this idea of participatory process, that the people who are going to live there have a huge say in what that place is going to look like, how it's going to work, what the houses are going to be like, what the site's going to be like, all of that. And then not just in the design, but in actually governing the community into the future. Co-housing, there's no charismatic leaders, there's no sort of core ideology that everybody has to believe in, besides appreciating and supporting community. And so in co-housing, people participate. They participate in the creation of their community, they participate in the sustenance of their community ad nauseum into the future. In terms of the site design, all co-housing is pedestrian focused. It usually clusters the houses, and the cars are kept to the periphery of the site, and pedestrians have safe places to interact and meet one another in the center of the community. And then another key aspect is indoor and outdoor common spaces. So you have places that you can spontaneously encounter your neighbors, effortlessly and spontaneously interact with them, sit with them, have a cup of tea, see what's going on in their lives. And it's sort of the anathema, or the opposite end of the spectrum, is the being able to drive through your neighborhood into your garage, close the garage, never see your neighbors, they don't know your name, they don't know what you look like. This is never going to happen in co-housing because you're walking by your neighbors' houses every day. And another thing about it, which is part of this participatory process, is that it's resident managed. So you don't have an outside management company sort of making the decisions and telling you what you need to do. It's the residents themselves that figure out what they're going to charge themselves to maintain their community, how they're going to maintain the community. There's a million ways to do it, but the residents make the call. Another thing is that it's a non-hierarchical structure and decision-making. Most co-housing communities in the US do some form of consensus-seeking or consensus-making decision-making for their community. So what that means is there's not a small board of people who get elected and then make all the decisions for the community. Major decisions, basically in co-housing, everybody has a say. And so things don't happen in your community that are sort of foisted upon you. You get to participate in the shape that they take. And then finally, there's no shared economy. So in contrast to a commune, most co-housing communities, if not all, are a home ownership model. So most people own their homes, or they may have some percentage of units in rental, but it's not communally owned generally, and people earn their own income, basically, or they come in with their own income. They don't expect to earn income or rely solely on income earned within the community. Okay, so in terms of the participatory process, I talked about this a little bit already. Basically, like this was, we participated in the design process in our own community. We worked with an architect who facilitated us and gave us ideas and extracted our vision and came back to us with home plans and site plans. And so it was a collaborative process. The whole thing was collaborative from start to finish. Basically, the whole idea behind co-housing is for the architecture and the way the community governs itself and functions socially, is that it's designed